The night everything changed started like any other on the Miller farm. Mark Miller was 18 years old, tall and strong from years of farm work, with kind brown eyes that had seen nothing more exciting than the birth of spring calves. That was about to change. The meteor shower began at midnight. Mark watched from his favorite spot on the old barn roof, where he often came to think about his future. The stars streaked across the sky like silver paint on black canvas, but one light moved differently from the others. It grew bigger and brighter, moving too slow for a shooting star. Then came the crash. The ground shook as something hit the earth in the backfield, behind the line of trees. Mark's heart raced as he climbed down from the roof. His parents were away at his aunt's house for the weekend, leaving him alone to investigate. He grabbed his flashlight and phone, hands shaking slightly as he walked toward the trees. The smell hit him first, burning metal and something strange, like ozone after a lightning strike. Through the trees, he saw it, a silver pot about the size of a car, split open like a cracked egg. Blue lights flickered inside, casting strange shadows on the ground. "Hello," Mark called out, his voice stronger than he felt. "Is anyone hurt?" A sound came from behind the pod, something between a groan and a whisper. Mark moved closer, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. What he saw made him drop the light. There, lying in the crushed grass, was a person. No, not exactly a person. The figure looked almost human, but with skin that seemed to shimmer like mother of pearl. Her hair, Mark thought it was her, flowed like liquid silver, and when she opened her eyes, they glowed with a soft purple light. She was hurt. Even in the dim light, Mark could see the dark liquid. Was it blood? Seeping from a cut on her arm. She tried to move away when he came closer, but winced in pain. "It's okay," Mark said softly, the way he talked to scared animals. "I want to help." The alien woman watched him with those glowing eyes, then spoke in a language that sounded like music and rushing water. When Mark shook his head to show he didn't understand, she pointed to herself and said, "Lyra." "Lyra," Mark repeated. "I'm Mark." He pointed to himself, then to her injury. "You're hurt. Let me help." Something in his voice or face must have convinced her. Lyra nodded slowly, allowing Mark to come closer. He took off his flannel shirt and carefully wrapped it around her arm to stop the bleeding. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said, looking at the crashed pod. "Can you walk?" Lyra understood his gestures, if not his words. She tried to stand but stumbled. Without thinking, Mark caught her. She felt light in his arms, like she was made of air and starlight. He helped her to the barn, knowing it was the safest place to hide her. His mind raced with questions. Where did she come from? Were others looking for her? What would happen if anyone found out? In the barn's light, he could see her better. Her face was beautiful but strange, with high cheekbones that caught the light like prisms. What looked like tattoos on her skin moved and shifted, forming patterns he couldn't understand. Mark made her comfortable on a bed of clean hay, covered with spare blankets he kept in the barn. He brought her water, which she drank gratefully, and the first aid kit from the house. As he cleaned her wound, he noticed it was already starting to heal, faster than any human injury would. Lyra watched him work with curious eyes. She reached out and touched his hand, then pointed to the stars visible through the barn window. Mark understood. She was trying to tell him where she came from. That night, as Mark sat watching over his strange guest, he knew his life would never be the same. He had so many questions, but one thing was clear. He had to protect her. Something in his heart told him this was important, that this moment mattered more than anything that had come before. As dawn approached, Lyra fell asleep, looking peaceful despite her ordeal. Mark watched the sunrise through the barn window, wondering what adventures tomorrow would bring. He didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of a story that would change not just his life, but the history of two worlds. His last thought before exhaustion took him was simple. How could he ever go back to normal life after meeting someone from the stars? Growing close. The morning sun streamed through the barn windows, catching Lyra's silvery hair like stardust. Mark entered with a tray of breakfast, toast, eggs, and fruit, stopping in his tracks when he saw her holding a small device the size of a pendant. "Good morning," he said softly. Lyra smiled and touched the device. To Mark's amazement, it projected a small hologram between them. "Good morning, Mark," she replied in perfect English, though her voice had a musical quality that made every word sound like a song. "You can speak English now." Mark nearly dropped the tray. "This is my universal translator. It learns languages quickly through observation and interaction." She pointed to the floating hologram where symbols danced and shifted. "Your language is surprisingly complex, yet beautiful." As Mark set down the tray, Lyra's eyes widened at the sight of the food. "These are Earth nutrients." "Just breakfast," Mark laughed. "Try the strawberries first." Her face lit up as she tasted the red fruit. "On my world, we synthesize most food. This has so much life in it." Her tattoo-like markings swirled with excitement, changing from silver to soft gold. Throughout the day, they shared their worlds with each other. Lyra showed Mark holograms of her home planet, crystal cities that floated in the clouds, ships that could fold space like paper. Mark taught her about Earth's simple pleasures: the smell of fresh hay, the warmth of sunlight on skin, the taste of homemade apple pie he snuck from the kitchen. "Your people are so connected to your world," Lyra observed, running her hands through a patch of wildflowers near the barn. "My civilization advanced so far that we sometimes forget to just feel." Mark watched her markings shift to a thoughtful blue. "What are those patterns on your skin?" "Emotional chromatics," she explained. "They show what we feel. My people consider it primitive to display emotions so openly. We're taught to control them, keep them neutral." She looked down. "I was never very good at that." As evening approached, they sat in the hayloft, watching the sunset. Mark played his old guitar, teaching Lyra simple songs. She was fascinated by music, saying her people had sound arrangements, but nothing that touched the heart like this. "Look," she said suddenly, pointing to the darkening sky. Using her pendant, she projected a star map in the air. "That's my home system, what you call HD 40,307. 6 planets, 3 habitable." Her voice carried a hint of homesickness. "Do you miss it?" Mark asked softly. "Yes and no. Everything there is perfect, controlled, planned. But here," she turned to him, her markings shimmering with colors he'd never seen before, "here I feel more alive in 2 days than I have in years." They talked deep into the night. Lyra explained how her people had achieved technological marvels, but lost something along the way: the ability to embrace imperfection, to feel deeply, to let life surprise them. Mark shared stories of human resilience, of art born from pain, of beauty found in broken things. "Your people are so young," Lyra mused, "yet you understand things my civilization has forgotten." As the moon rose, Lyra taught Mark words from her language, complex terms for emotions humans hadn't named yet. "This one," she said, making a sound like wind through crystal, "means the joy of discovering something that changes everything you thought you knew." "How do you say it again?" Mark tried to repeat it, making Lyra laugh. Her markings danced with amusement, creating patterns that looked like falling stars. "You know," she said, suddenly serious, "I was supposed to be observing Earth from orbit, not making contact. This is against every protocol." Her markings swirled with worry. "Do you regret it?" Mark asked, heart beating faster. Before she could answer, a bright light flashed in the distance. Another ship entering atmosphere. Lyra's markings paled to white with fear. "They're looking for me," she whispered. The light grew closer, and with it, the weight of decisions yet to come. The choice. The search ship passed overhead without stopping, its lights fading into the night sky. Mark and Lyra stayed hidden in the old storm cellar, hearts racing. When they finally emerged, the stars seemed different somehow. no longer just beautiful, but threatening. 3 days, Lyra said quietly, her markings a deep blue of sadness. My rescue ship will arrive in 3 days. They can track my emergency beacon. She touched the pendant at her neck, the one that also served as her translator. Mark felt his world shrinking. 3 days, he repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. Then you have to go. That night, neither could sleep. They sat on the farmhouse porch, sharing the last piece of apple pie. Lyra's markings had taken on a new pattern, swirling circles that seemed to chase each other across her skin. I've never seen that pattern before, Mark said. It means confusion and something else. She set down her plate. On my world, we have a saying. Duty is the star that guides us. Everything I've ever done was for duty. Until now. Mark watched her in the moonlight. What's different now? You. Her voice was barely a whisper. My people believe we're beyond emotions, beyond attachment. But being here with you, her markings shifted to deep purple with gold edges, a pattern he'd never seen before. The next day, they tried to make every moment count. Lyra used her technology to show Mark incredible things, holograms of distant worlds, creatures that looked impossible, cities that defied physics. But what fascinated her most was watching Mark fix an old tractor, his hands covered in grease, humming as he worked. Your people make art of everything, she said, helping him hand tools, even repair work. It's not art, he laughed, just life. That's exactly what I mean. Her markings rippled. We've forgotten how to find beauty in simple things. On the second day, they drove to the lake in Mark's truck. Lyra was fascinated by water. Her world had none on the surface. She stepped into the cool lake, her markings matching the ripples around her. I have a confession, she said as they sat on the shore. I could have called for rescue the first day. I chose to wait. Mark's heart skipped. Why? Because I needed to understand. She picked up a smooth stone, turning it in her hands. My people think humans are primitive because you feel so much, want so much, dream so much. But sitting here, I realize we're the primitive ones. We've engineered the wonder right out of our lives. That night, their last full night together, they danced in the barn to old country songs on Mark's radio. Lyra's markings pulsed with the rhythm, creating a light show that made the barn feel magical. Teach me one more word in your language, Mark said, trying to memorize everything about this moment. Lyra made a sound like crystal wind chimes in a storm. It means the pain of leaving something precious, knowing it made you better for having known it. Mark tried to repeat it, but the sounds wouldn't come. Instead, he pulled her closer as they danced. The final morning arrived with a red sunrise. They stood in the field where they'd first met, watching the sky for signs of the rescue ship. I have to tell you something, Lyra said, her markings almost transparent with emotion. In my position, I could request a permanent Earth observation post. I could stay. No, Mark said, though it hurt like physical pain. You have responsibilities. Your people need you. But what if I need this? Her markings swirled with colors he'd never seen, complex patterns of longing and fear and something deeper. What if I need to feel alive like this? The rescue ship appeared in the sky, a silver tear in the morning blue. As it descended, Lyra's markings settled into a calm pattern, but her eyes gave her away. I will find a way back, she said, pressing her pendant into his hand. It might take time, maybe years, but I will come back. The translator. Keep it. Learn my language. How will you communicate without it? She smiled sadly. I won't need to hide my emotions there anymore. They'll know something changed me. Her markings flashed with determination. And maybe that's exactly what my people need. Someone to remind them what it means to feel. The ship landed with a soft hum. Before she turned to go, Lyra taught Mark one last word in her language, a sound like a sunrise set to music. What does it mean? He asked. Promise, she said, touching his face gently. Her markings showed a pattern he'd never seen before, and would never see again, one that meant both goodbye and forever. As the ship rose into the sky, taking Lyra with it, Mark held the pendant tight. He had no way of knowing if she could really come back, if her people would allow it, if the galaxy itself would conspire to keep them apart. But he knew one thing: nothing in his life would ever be the same. That night, alone in the barn, he practiced the word she taught him. Promise. It sounded like hope. The return. Mark's hands shook as he carried Lyra's unconscious form into his farmhouse. 10 years had changed him. His face weathered by sun and work, his shoulders broader, his eyes carrying the weight of waiting. But Lyra looked exactly the same as the day she left, her silvery hair flowing like stardust, her skin still shimmering with those strange, beautiful markings. He laid her gently on the couch, the same one where they'd once spent hours talking about the stars. Her markings were pale, almost transparent, but they still moved slowly across her skin like waves in moonlight. "Please be okay," he whispered, touching the translator pendant he'd worn every day since she left. He'd learned her language, practicing those strange, musical words until they felt natural on his tongue. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, their purple glow dim at first, then brightening when they found his face. Her markings suddenly blazed with color, swirling patterns of gold and blue that he'd never seen before. "Mark," she said in her own language, the sound like wind through crystal. "You still have the pendant." "I promised I'd learn," he replied in her tongue, the words flowing like water. Her markings pulsed with surprise and joy, then quickly shifted to a warning red. She tried to sit up too fast, grimacing in pain. "Easy," Mark said, switching back to English. "You crashed pretty hard. What happened? Why are you back?" Lyra's markings darkened to a deep purple, the color of troubled thoughts. "I spent 10 years fighting to return," she said, her voice heavy. "My people, they weren't happy when I came back changed. They could see it in my markings, emotions they thought we'd evolved past centuries ago." She touched her arm where a thin silver band was embedded in her skin. "They tried to fix me, said I was contaminated by human emotions. They wanted to erase my memories of Earth, of you." Mark's heart clenched. "How did you escape?" "I had help." A small smile played at her lips. "Turns out I wasn't the only one who thought our civilization had lost something important. There's a whole underground movement now, people who want to feel again, who think we were wrong about humans." She tried to stand, and Mark helped her up. Her markings swirled with both pain and determination. "I was high in the Science Council," she continued. "I had access to restricted files about Earth. I discovered something they've been hiding for centuries." Her markings pulsed with urgency. "Humans aren't less evolved than us. Mark, you're what comes after us." "What do you mean?" "My people chose logic over emotion, technology over instinct. We thought we were advancing, but we were just stopping, freezing ourselves in time." She walked to the window, looking at the stars. "But humans, you feel everything, dream everything, try everything. You fail and learn and grow. You're what evolution looks like, messy and beautiful and alive." Her markings suddenly flickered with fear. "They're coming for me. When I stole those files and ran, I knew they'd follow. But I had to tell you, had to warn Earth." Mark moved closer to her. "Warn us about what?" "There's a faction in the Council that wants to save humanity from itself. They think if they intervene now, guide your development, they can help you skip the primitive emotional stage." Her voice turned bitter. "They want to make you like us." "They can't do that," Mark said firmly. "We wouldn't let them. You might not have a choice. Their technology." She stopped, her markings suddenly going white with fear. She rushed to the window. "No, they found me too quickly." High in the night sky, lights were appearing. Not stars, but ships dropping out of some higher dimension into Earth's atmosphere. "Mark." Lyra turned to him, her markings showing a pattern he'd never seen before. one that spoke of fear and love and determination all at once. I didn't just come back to warn Earth. I came back because her markings shifted to that deep purple with gold edges he remembered from 10 years ago. Because every moment since I left, I felt like I was only half alive. My people think love is a primitive emotion, but I think it's the most advanced thing in the universe. Outside, the lights were getting closer. Mark took her hand, noticing how her markings seemed to reach out toward his skin where they touched. "Then we'll face them together," he said in her language, the words carrying all the emotion of 10 years of waiting. Lyra's markings blazed with sudden hope. "There's something else," she said quickly. "Something I learned from those files. About why humans can feel so much, dream so much. About what you're becoming. But first," she looked out the window again. "First, we need to survive the next few hours." The ships were close enough now to see their shapes. Sleek silver arrows piercing the night sky. Mark squeezed Lyra's hand. "I didn't wait 10 years just to lose you again," he said. Lyra's markings swirled with that same pattern. Fear, love, determination. "No," she agreed. "This time, I'm staying. Whatever it takes." The first ship touched down in the field where they'd first met, its lights painting the farmhouse in strange colors. Mark and Lyra stood together at the window, watching as the ship's door began to open, revealing shadows of figures that looked almost human, but not quite. The time for reunion was over. The time for fighting had begun. The chase. The farmhouse back door burst open as Mark and Lyra ran into the night. Behind them, silver-skinned figures emerged from their ship, their movements too perfect to be human. Lyra's markings pulsed with a rapid, warning red. "They're using tracker beams," she gasped, pulling Mark toward his truck. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they can lock onto my genetic signature." Mark fumbled with his keys, then stopped. "Wait. They'll expect us to take the truck." He grabbed her hand. The old tunnels. From the Prohibition days. They sprinted to the barn, their footsteps muffled by the wet grass. The night was alive with strange humming sounds as more ships appeared in the sky. Inside the barn, Mark pulled up the hidden trapdoor he'd discovered as a kid, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. "Your ancestors built these?" Lyra asked as they hurried down, her markings providing a soft purple glow. "Farmers helping each other hide alcohol from the government," Mark explained, leading her through the narrow passage. The tunnels connect half the farms in the county. Behind them, they heard the barn door crash open. Voices called out in Lyra's language. Musical sounds turned harsh with anger. "They're saying I'm infected," Lyra translated, her markings flickering between fear and determination. "That human emotions are like a virus to our kind." She smiled slightly. "They're right, in a way. Feeling this much, it does change you." They emerged from the tunnel into an old storm cellar 2 farms over. Mark's friend Tom's farm, the same Tom who now worked for a secret government division studying extraterrestrial possibilities. "Tom," Mark called softly, knocking on the cellar's ceiling door. "Code Skywalker." The door opened, revealing the surprised face. "Mark, I thought we only used that code for..." Tom's words trailed off as he saw Lyra, her markings casting shifting colors on the cellar walls. "She came back," Mark said simply. Tom's surprise turned to quick understanding. "The strange readings we've been getting all night." "Your friends?" he asked Lyra. "Not friends," she replied. Her markings suddenly flared bright red. "They're scanning this area. We need to move." Tom led them quickly to his garage, revealing the modified black SUV. "Government issue," he explained, opening the doors, shielded against most forms of detection. As they sped away, Lyra explained everything. The files she'd stolen, the Council's plans for humanity, the underground movement on her world. Tom listened, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "So they want to help us by making us emotionless." He shook his head. "That's not going to happen." "There's more," Lyra said, her markings turning that deep purple that meant she was sharing something important. The files revealed why they're really afraid of humans. Your capacity for emotion, it's not primitive. It's... She stopped as a bright light appeared ahead of them. Tom swerved off the main road, taking the dirt path through cornfields. Above them, ships sliced through the night sky like silver needles. Your emotions are tied to something else, Lyra continued, bracing herself as they bumped along. Something my people lost centuries ago. The capacity to. The car suddenly died, all its systems shutting down at once. They're using an energy-dampening field, Lyra said, her markings paling with fear. We need to run. Now. They abandoned the car, rushing into the cornfield. The stalks were high, offering some cover, but they could hear the hunters behind them. Strange lights played through the corn leaves, casting multiple shadows that made it hard to know which way to turn. Mark. Lyra grabbed his arm, her markings swirling with urgent purpose. I need to tell you what I found in those files. About humans. About what you can do. A beam of light cut between them, scorching the corn. They ran again, separating and weaving through the rows. Mark could hear Tom somewhere to his left, creating a diversion by making noise. The chase led them to an old quarry. They were trapped between the steep walls and their pursuers. Lyra's markings suddenly blazed with a fierce light. Remember how I said humans are what comes after us? She said quickly. It's because you can do something we forgot. Something we thought was just primitive superstition before we became advanced. The hunters were closing in, their silver forms visible through the last rows of corn. Lyra took Mark's hands, and her markings began to pulse with a rhythm he'd never seen before. My people think emotions make you weak, she said. But they're wrong. They're so wrong. Human emotions. They're connected to something bigger, something powerful. Her markings were almost blindingly bright now. You just need someone to show you how to use them. The hunters burst through the corn, raising weapons that hummed with strange energy. But Lyra was already teaching Mark something, not in words, but in the way her markings pulsed against his skin, in the way her mind seemed to reach for his. And for the first time in human history, someone began to understand what evolution had been preparing humanity for all along. The hunters fired their weapons, but something was about to change. Something that would shake the foundations of two civilizations. And it started with love, the most powerful force in any universe. The stand. The quarry lit up like daybreak as energy poured from Mark's body. Not the cold, technological power of the hunter's weapons, but something warm and alive. His skin glowed with patterns similar to Lyra's markings, but in earthen tones of gold and deep bronze. Impossible, one of the hunters said in their musical language. Humans aren't capable of bioelectric manifestation. But Mark wasn't just manifesting energy. Every emotion he'd ever felt, 10 years of waiting, of loving, of hoping, had become visible light, becoming something more than just feeling. Lyra's markings pulsed in sync with his glow, their energies intertwining. This is what the council feared, Lyra announced, her voice carrying across the quarry. Not that humans were too primitive, but that they're evolving into something new. Something that combines emotion and energy in ways we've forgotten. Tom stared in amazement from behind a boulder. Mark, what's happening to you? I understand now, Mark said, his voice resonating strangely. Lyra's people chose technology over their natural abilities. They suppressed their emotions until they lost this power. The power to turn feelings into energy. More ships appeared overhead, their lights turning the scene into a strange twilight of competing glows. A new figure emerged from the largest ship, tall, distinguished, with markings that swirled in complex patterns of authority. High Counselor Vale, Lyra said, her markings flashing with recognition. Former Scout Lyra, Vale replied in perfect English. You've caused quite a disruption. Stealing classified files, fleeing to Earth, contaminating our pursuit team with emotional radiation. He gestured to the hunters, whose markings were starting to pulse with unfamiliar patterns. They're not contaminated. Lyra stood her ground. They're remembering. Just being near humans is awakening what we buried centuries ago. Mark stepped forward, the ground humming beneath his feet. You need to leave Earth alone. We're not your experiment to control. Young human. Vale's markings showed a mixture of curiosity and concern. You don't understand. Without guidance, humanity will destroy itself with these abilities once they fully manifest. We've seen it happen on other worlds. No, Mark's voice carried across the quarry, and somehow he knew others would hear it too, not just here, but everywhere. You're the ones who don't understand. He raised his hands, and the light within him grew brighter. Across the farm fields, people were coming out of their houses, drawn by something they couldn't explain. Each of them began to glow faintly, unconsciously responding to Mark's awakened power. Humans have never stopped evolving. Mark continued, his words broadcasting not just in English now, but in ways everyone could understand. We feel so much because we're meant to transform those feelings into something more. But we don't need to choose between emotion and advancement like you did. Lyra's markings blazed as she joined her energy with his. Around the quarry, the hunters' markings were changing, showing colors they hadn't displayed in centuries. Look at your own people. Mark gestured to the hunters. Just being near human emotions is awakening what you lost. You didn't evolve past feelings. You suppressed the very thing that was meant to transform you. More humans were arriving now, their combined glow turning night into day. Among them were faces Mark knew, farmers, teachers, families, all unconsciously manifesting the power that had always been within them. Vale's markings showed confusion for the first time. This is unprecedented. The models didn't predict. Because you can't predict evolution, Lyra interrupted. You can't control it. The same way you can't control love, or hope, or courage. She turned to the growing crowd. Humans aren't going to destroy themselves with these abilities. They're going to show us what we lost. Mark took her hand, their energies creating patterns of light that spoke of possibilities neither civilization had imagined. Your people try to remove emotion from advancement, he said to Vale. But look around. Look what happens when you combine them instead. The quarry had become a lake of light. Every human was glowing now, their combined energy forming patterns that mirrored the stars above. Even Vale's markings were responding, showing colors that hadn't been seen in his species for generations. We're offering you a choice, Mark said, addressing not just Vale, but all of Lyra's people. Stay and learn with us. Remember what you lost, or leave us to find our own way. But you cannot stop this. Evolution doesn't ask permission. The council. Vale began, but his markings were shifting, showing the internal change already beginning. The council can join us, Lyra said firmly, or they can watch from a distance, but they cannot prevent what's natural. She looked at the hunters, whose markings now pulsed with rediscovered emotions. Your own people are already changing. The question is, will you change with them? Above them, more ships were arriving. Not hunter ships, but vessels from the underground movement Lyra had mentioned. Their pilots' markings were already showing the vibrant colors of reawakened abilities. Mark turned to the crowd of glowing humans, their light reflecting off the quarry walls like countless stars. This is who we are, he said simply. Not primitive, not advanced, just alive and evolving. And anyone who wants to evolve with us is welcome. Vale looked at his people, at the humans, at the impossible energy filling the night. His markings shifted through colors he'd forgotten existed, and he made a decision that would change two civilizations forever. The stand wasn't just about defending Earth anymore. It had become something greater, a moment of transformation, a bridge between two paths of evolution, a reminder that the greatest power in the universe isn't technology or control. It's the ability to feel, to change, and to grow. The night blazed with the light of a new beginning, as humanity showed an advanced civilization that the path forward wasn't about choosing between emotion and evolution. It was about bringing them together. The resolution. Sunrise painted the sky in colors that seemed more vivid than before, as if the events of the night had changed even the way light touched the earth. Mark stood in his farm field, the same field where he'd first found Lyra 10 years ago, watching as ships from both factions of her people landed in a wide circle. Lyra's markings shimmered with dawn colors as she squeezed his hand, ready to change the universe. "As long as we're together," he replied, his skin still faintly glowing with the new power they'd discovered. High Counselor Vale approached them, his own markings showing colors that hadn't been seen in their species for centuries. Behind him, dozens of his people were interacting with the humans who'd gathered, their markings gradually shifting to show more emotion. "We've received word from the Council," Vale announced, his voice carrying that musical quality of his species. "After seeing the broadcasts of last night's events, they've made an unprecedented decision." Mark felt Lyra tense beside him. Her markings swirled with anticipation. "The Council recognizes that we were wrong about human evolution," Vale continued. "More importantly, we were wrong about our own path. In trying to perfect ourselves, we nearly destroyed ourselves." His markings showed a complex pattern of humility and hope. "They're calling it the Great Remembering." Around them, more ships were landing, these filled with scientists, artists, and scholars from Lyra's world, all drawn by the possibility of rediscovering what their civilization had lost. Many of their markings were already showing new colors just from being near the emotionally charged humans. Tom approached with a group of government officials. "The President has authorized Operation Bridge," he announced. "We're establishing official diplomatic relations with both the Council and the underground movement." "And the emotional awakening?" Lyra asked. "Are humans ready for these new abilities?" As if in answer, a child in the crowd began to glow, her joy at seeing the alien ships manifesting as gentle light. Around her, other humans were unconsciously doing the same, their feelings creating patterns in the air that matched the visitors' markings. "We've always been ready," Mark said. "We just needed to understand what our emotions were preparing us for." Vale nodded. "The Council has approved our proposal. We'll establish learning centers around your world, places where our people can relearn emotional expression while helping humans understand their evolving abilities. And us." Lyra's markings showed a pattern Mark had come to recognize as love mixed with uncertainty. "What about those of us who want to stay?" "The Council has created a new position." Vale's markings rippled with something like amusement. "Ambassador of Evolution. They want you to be the first, Lyra." "You and Mark together." Mark looked at Lyra in surprise. Her markings were blazing with joy. "They finally understand," she said. "Evolution isn't about becoming more advanced. It's about becoming more complete." As if to emphasize her words, a wave of light passed through the gathered humans, their collective emotions creating a display that rivaled the sunrise. The visitors' markings responded in kind, creating a dance of light and color that spoke of two species remembering how to feel together. "There's something else," Mark said, turning to Lyra. The glow within him formed specific patterns, ones he'd been practicing in secret. To everyone's amazement, the light took the shape of a small object hovering between them, a ring crafted from pure energy. Lyra's markings exploded into colors of joy and surprise as Mark knelt. "10 years ago, you crashed into my field and changed my life," he said, his voice carrying the same resonance it had during the stand. "You showed me that love isn't just an emotion. It's a force that can transform worlds." The ring glowed brighter. "Will you marry me? Not just as a human, and whatever we're becoming, but as a bridge between our peoples." Lyra's answer came not in words but in light, her markings creating patterns that merged with his glow to form a spectacular aurora above the farm. The gathered humans and visitors alike burst into applause and their own displays of light. Vale stepped forward, his markings showing formal patterns. "The Council would be honored to recognize the first union between our species, a symbol of our new path together." The news spread quickly across both worlds. Within months, the learning centers were established. helping humans understand their emerging abilities while the visitors remembered their lost emotional depths. The farm became the first center, its fields now growing both earth crops and strange, beautiful plants from Lyra's world. Mark and Lyra's wedding was watched by billions on both planets. As they spoke their vows, their combined light created patterns that would be studied by scientists and artists for generations. Proof that when two species evolve together, they create something entirely new. 10 years after she first crashed in his field, Mark and Lyra stood again under the stars. But now they weren't alone or afraid. Around them, humans and visitors learned from each other, their lights and markings creating ever-changing displays in the night sky. Was it worth it? Mark asked, watching a group of children, both human and visitor, learning to manipulate light with their emotions. Lyra's markings showed that deep purple with gold edges, the pattern that had always meant love. "Look around," she said softly. "We didn't just find each other. We helped two civilizations remember how to feel." Above them, the stars seemed brighter somehow, as if responding to the evolution happening below. Somewhere up there, other worlds were waiting to learn what these two species had discovered. That the greatest power in the universe isn't technology or logic or even emotion alone. It's the courage to feel everything, the wisdom to evolve together, and the understanding that love, in all its forms, is the force that moves us forward. The story of a crashed ship and a farmer's son had become the story of two civilizations remembering how to be whole. And as Mark and Lyra's light merged with the starlight above, they knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning.